No, it's been pretty cool since the last time we spoke. I've had quite a few people like listen to what we spoke about, and especially some of my clients, and talking especially the topic of stress and exercise. It's been very, very cool, like the feedback from them as well. You know, a couple of them, one client in particular is a psychologist, and we were having cool kind of discussions along the forms or the realms of psychology and exercise. It's been very interesting, you know.
Oh wow, I'm excited. Yeah, I was like, we did have quite a few people watch that, which is really it's interesting. I guess I mean that's the thing, right? Is like I'm still surprised by like people coming and going, hey, I've been watching the Fix My Posture stuff, or like someone going, I'm watching what you're doing, and I'm going, it's really awesome because I think there's so much to grab people's attention these days. You know what I mean? It's like between Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and all this stuff, and to have people actually spend time to listen to you is such a privilege and honor. So I'm
No, it is a welcome thing, you know, especially the different mediums that we have. You know, you got your short little Instagram clips, and then now you got your full form YouTube videos, and it's cool. And if the feedback is good, then it's helped kind of, especially direct the conversation. So depending on what comments come up, you know, it's like, oh, this was something we missed out on. So people were asking, well, what about this aspect? And like, well, there's only so many hours in a day. So when it comes to the conversation, we need to kind of compress it, which is why I thought we'd have a second one and just touch on a whole bunch of other points that we not missed out on, but just we couldn't really get to, you know.
Yeah. Okay. I'm excited.
Yeah. So your Fix My Posture series that you've been doing, how long have you been doing? How long have you been doing that kind of series for?
So I started just after our first COVID lockdown. So I think that was like March when COVID was like, okay, global shutdown basically. And I had just started working. I mean, I had pretty much registered to work like September, October the year before, so that was 2019. And it wasn't much time. And then all of a sudden I was stuck at home for 2 weeks and with no idea as to like, am I going to go back to work? Am I actually going to be a chiropractor? And like, so it was just crazy. And so I think what had kind of happened was I realized everyone had gone from the office and, you know, where they've got desks and chairs and office chairs and desks to home where people were working from their beds, and then they were working from their dining room tables, and it just kind of sparked this thing of like, well, let me just talk about posture and maybe get people aware on, you know, like how to sit and how to stand. And so it started then, and I honestly didn't think it was going to be such a long series. It kind of ran for about 2 years, which is crazy. Because what had happened was I just figured, I mean, it would be one of the sessions of me going, hey, this is how you sit, this is how you stand and thing. And then as I started diving into like the literature, I was like, oh, wait, we need to talk about this. And so then it was, okay, and, you know, psychology behind posture. And then introducing people into the talk show. And then it was, radio station. I did 12 sessions on a radio, which is crazy. Yeah. And so talking about that, about posture, right? People just responded because it was something that people could all identify with. And it's funny because every time I say posture, everyone goes, oh, I need to just stop straight.
I find myself doing it now as well. It's the same posture. Right?
So that's kind of what happened. So it was, to answer your question, actually, was March-ish 2020.
That's also pretty cool, you know. It almost feels like, you know, with yourself being a chiropractor and on the topic of posture, the moment that seed is in someone's head, as we're talking about it, becomes a subliminal cue. So if there's some way we can have these constant reminders about these important things at your desk, whether it's setting an alarm on your phone, or, you know, having like a little figurine on your laptop, whatever, anything to kind of trick your body into kind of this correctiveness, because without you even knowing, you tend to kind of slouching, and all of a sudden you're sliding out of view, and all the people at home are like, where are you going? But if you can have some type of a cue just to keep you upright, then that's half the battle done, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
It's
And I've
amazing
been
what escapes your mind.
yeah. No, I agree with you. I've been telling people to put sticky notes on their computers or around
Yeah,
them because, you know, you forget. And the thing is, when you're engrossed in something, you just like, you've got people that sit. I
of
had
course.
2 female players come in on Friday, and they're like, oh yeah, we like work for like 18 hours a day. And I'm going, okay. And it's like, yeah, we can sit at the desk. And then the next thing is like 8 hours. And I'm like, my goodness, this is crazy. But I get it. Because when you're engrossed in something, like the time can just go by and
Yeah,
all of a sudden you've been sitting there for, you know,
sure.
8 hours. And then, you know, with the screen somehow, I find myself doing it whenever I'm very interested in something. I'm leaning into it, right? So it's like constantly like leaning. And the
Yeah.
next thing you're like, right at the screen. You don't know how you got there. Now you're like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. It's just
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you on the cues, like just having little things and drinking lots of water because then you've got to get up and go to the bathroom. So
Big
that's
time,
another.
I've actually had with a lot of my online clients, we're talking about that exact same thing. So whether we, you know, like we spoke about before, we're doing a lot more work sitting at our desks at home or sitting at our tables at home or even in the office. So we spend a lot more time sitting because we no longer are traveling to the office, or we're traveling to the office a lot less. So getting up and going to your car and moving around it's become quite minimal. So what I've recommended to the guys is that for every hour, spend about 45 minutes or maybe even 50 minutes of that hour doing the work, and then dedicate that 10-minute time at the end of that hour just to get up and break the kind of the alignment or break the posture of poor posture. So, you know, before you know it, another hour's kicked in, another hour's kicked in, and you're there, you're 4, 5, 6 hours in without sitting down. And then what's generally dragged with is, oh, I haven't drunk water, or I haven't gone to have a snack, I haven't moved. And you're going to get this real negative effects from all those type of things. So that 10-minute buffer, sometimes you have to remind yourself, you put an alarm, or it's 10 to, I'm now going to get up and do XYZ movement for 5 minutes of that 10 minutes. So I'll generally send them 5 movements to do 30 seconds each, 2 times, 5 of the basic ones, you know, whether you're just mobilizing the hips or kind of in particular opening up the chest. You can do that at the edge of your table, you know, and then during that period, or while I'm up, I'm also going to something to drink. And that's when all these good habits start falling into place, you know. But it's so easy to get sucked into like this time loop of, you know, it's like you step into another dimension. You're there, all of a sudden 2 hours is gone, and you know, what have you done for yourself apart from the work? You know, getting the work done is important.
So
the posture is as important.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think so there's 3 things that I wanted to kind of pull out from what you said is so the first thing that I think is really important is kind of dealing with ourselves as if we are people we care for, right? Because I think one of the things that we tend to do is, and whether, you know, it's so complicated because, you know, whether you're a workaholic and all of that is like, if we had to take it a step back and ask you the question of why are you a workaholic or why are you in this toxic situation, we may be kind of going all the way back to like traumas or insecurities, or so it's not as simple, right? And maybe that's my pessimistic view of this whole situation. But the optimistic part of it is that you can do things to change your experience of the life that you've chosen to live. And I think the first one is really negotiating with yourself, because we can be, I think I heard someone say, we can be terrible employees, but even worse bosses to ourselves. And just that is like, we're not negotiating with ourselves and treating ourselves as if we were someone we cared for. Because if you saw someone you loved sitting there without eating, without going to the bathroom, without drinking water, all of these things, you would get frustrated because you're like, come on, man, you've got to take care of yourself, right? And so it's that you know, mindfulness aspect that I think I always seem to go back to is like, thinking versus behavior, right? Is like, how are you thinking about the situation? And then two, just in terms of from a biological perspective, you know, your ligaments in your spine, right? So that those are the tissue in a sense that sit from bone to bone, and that's the ligament, right?
Yep.
And you can see the ligament as an elastic band, which is, you know, with each movement is very dynamic. So if you're going into flexion, you're going to almost have that elastic band stretch.
Yeah.
And then when you go back out, you have it go back to its like original size, right?
Yeah.
But what happens when you take an elastic band and you hold it out at that lengthened, you know, in a lengthened position for a long time, when you let it go, it's not going to go back to its original shape or size or, you know, form.
Yeah.
It's going to keep that lengthened position. So it's the same thing with our ligaments, right? And that's why posture initially for me was like, okay, we need to do this, and you need to get your shoulders blades back, and you need to, you know, open your chest, and yeah, mountain pose great, but it quickly became, you need to be dynamic, you need to be moving because your body's responding to movement. So if you are in a flexion posture, what is that doing? Well, one, you're telling your brain this is just the posture I need to be in. But the other thing is your ligaments in the back, you're holding them in extended positions, and that's not going to be great because it's not going to go back to its original size, and that's going to lead to different things. And then the third thing is just the research showing that, and I love what you're doing with the 10-minute gap, because the research shows that if you do exercise at the end of the day, so let's say people go, yeah, I sit for 8 hours, but then I'm doing gym at the end of the day. Well, it actually shows that that doesn't cancel out the damage you've done by sitting for so long, right? Okay. So you do actually need those gaps so that you can get your body moving, you know, back. So it's a time sensitive situation, because you look at the ligaments, that stretch thing can, that, you know, stretching, I want to kind of find words to use, but it's like that ability for it to stretch and then maintain that lengthened position can happen in as quickly as 20 minutes.
Wow.
Right. So that, I mean, that's, so we're dealing with a time sensitive situation, but when we think of our body as this machine that's constantly taking in and giving out information, like that's all it's doing, is like, in that case, because we're constantly processing things, we have to consider time.
Yeah.
Yes, you were kind of going on about the whole kind of
Okay, so the reason why we're laughing is that we had the internet drop and we're trying to merge it all together again. Could have been a load shedding issue.
I know. Well, you know what happened is like it froze on my end too, and I was like, "Is that my internet or his?" I just wasn't sure.
Like I was saying, I'm busy talking, and you just, hey, your musical statues just kick off.
Oh, so fun.
Yeah, basically what I was talking about when you mentioned again, just to reiterate, you mentioned when we're sitting for those long periods of time and the body's in that flex position and the certain muscles are constantly deloaded and other areas are kind of pulled tight. It just reminds me of, when we look functionally, that you want that loading and unloading phase. So I made a reference before to that throwing a ball or throwing a spear or whatever have you, that in order for an object to go forward, we need to first move the object backward by loading the muscles and getting everything kind of building up and storing energy. And then when you load and lock, then you can unload. And then the task of having this object go forward is initiated by going backwards, first of all. Even if I'm sitting in a chair, if I want to stand up, I first have to lean forward and possibly go down. So people at home can do that right now. As you're sitting in your chair right now, try stand up without loading the body. And what I mean by that, try stand up without first loading the body downwards in order to go upward. It's virtually impossible. You can't just unload. The body doesn't work by just unloading things that it hasn't already kind of stored. Rubber bands are the same way. A rubber band is just a rubber band. It needs a buildup of energy, and then when you let it go, it shoots out. And the body is just basically a series of rubber bands attached to bone and held together by cables and hard tissue. And so it needs to be put in that constant position of storing energy and then unloading, storing and unloading. And that gets the synergy of all the muscles, like your posterior chain, your anterior chain, your slings, everything kind of working together via that mechanism of loading it up first, storing energy, and then unloading it, either slowly with strength or explosively for power. And that's also quite interesting thing. The moment people realize that, it changes the whole application of an exercise from the bodybuilding just unload, unload, versus the more functional preload, flow dynamic. But again, these are two different demands. One is muscle building, which has a purpose, and function, which is another purpose. But it's interesting. Very cool. Kind of like memory foam.
Yeah. So oh, right. Yeah, it does. So I have a question for you, because you know, I like that you brought in the concept of the slings, right, which I thought was really incredible. So you know, you've got that, like you said, the longitudinal sling, which run around almost next to your spine, and then into your glute, into your hamstring, and down. And I think I'm seeing a lot of people with weak glutes, and that's often because of the, I think it's the sitting, actually, which is quite interesting. Is it's just not a lot of extension happening, a lot of tight iliopsoas, you know, and I keep telling people that, well, that's your sitting muscle, and so, you know, it kind of makes sense that would be tight. But so in the context of that kinetic chain, kinetic energy loading, what happens when you kind of have that weak glute and then to the rest of the muscles and the rest of the body?
So would you say what happens to the body with a weak glute?
Yeah.
So basically, if you look at the way we've evolved, you know, from all fours, kind of lumbering around on our stomachs, and then on all fours, and then to becoming bipedal. So the sheer fact that we're bipedal, that we have upright posture and we stand on two legs, requires the glute function to be quite you know, dominant in the body. So first of all, the function of the glute is to take your leg and to kind of kick it back and externally rotate it. So if this is your leg and your glutes are behind you, the function is when the glutes contract, it pulls the leg back, and then furthermore, it externally rotates it. So if you take that back and out movement on your right leg and your back and out movement of your left leg, if you lock the foot in place, then you're going to have an equal and opposite reaction upstairs. So instead of the leg going back and out, the body goes forward and counter rotates. So if I push forward with my right leg, then my body is going to go forward, and then instead of the foot turning out, my body is going to counter rotate from there. So you get that posterior chain. So from that hamstring to the glute up into the opposite lat. So the muscles from this shoulder on your left-hand side to your right hip on the back, your glute, and down your hamstring. They all follow that line. So from this top left to bottom right, and then from your top right to your bottom left, posterior, all those muscles kind of interact together. So purely the purpose of the glute is just to keep the hip extension going. So it keeps you tall and it propels the hips forward, amongst many things. But as far as movement, as far as gait patterns and walking, that's the major thing. So when the glutes are dysfunctional, when we're sitting too much, we don't expose them to walking, lunging, squatting, running, climbing, stepping, bending, everything that keeps the glutes active functionally, not just developed as in size, but also developed as in function and purpose. So if we remove the glute's purpose, there's a breakdown everywhere. And the glute is the biggest muscle in the body. It's not necessarily the strongest, but it's the biggest. And the sheer fact that it's the biggest means its purpose is enormous. And it just kind of stabilizes the pelvis. It rotates and kicks back the leg. It's fundamental. And the moment we undo, the moment we sit, we're in a constant stretched position. As you mentioned with the spine, everything is kind of hunched forward. So the muscles in the back are constantly under stretch. So we don't want that for the, we want constant loading and unloading, loading and unloading. You know, we want to move constantly. We want to run, climb trees, and then gather things and hunt. And that's the primary need for the body is motion. And the moment we eliminate motion, we invite dysfunction, because there's no function present in its purpose, you know.
Yeah, because I can add to what you're saying. So, I mean, you spoke about muscle, and then I can talk about joint, right? Where one of the things is the idea of, and I'm not sure if we actually spoke about this in the last session, was that just the idea that, you know, we don't have preset templates for movement. So with our joints, if we're not actually moving them through their full ranges of motion, then you actually have restriction in the motion, right? And the problem with that is that nutrition and detoxification in that area, a lot of the time when it comes to joints and discs, so looking at your spinal discs, have a lot to do with movement, right? So if you think of the, you know, the shoulder joint, or, you know, the hip, and maybe we can talk about the hip joint, is really asking the question, and how many of us actually know, what is the actual range of motion of the hip? And when you're doing it, are you doing it purely from the hip, or are you compensating from other areas like your lower back or your knee or your ankle even? Because that's been another thing, is when people come in with back pain into the practice, I can't solely look at the back, because it could be caused from the top or from the bottom, right? And oftentimes, if you look at people's range of motion, and you just ask a simple thing like, hey, move your joint and see. And most people are like, oh man, like, you know, you kind of ask them to move their shoulder, and all of a sudden they're completely rotated just to try and get that shoulder back. And so it's something that we all can understand, right? And then the discs, which you see a lot of people with disc herniations, and it's a massive thing, and people are like, oh my gosh, degeneration and disc issues. And I really talk about stability, and I talk about the disc anatomy, right? It's just the idea that it doesn't actually have great blood supply. So it's almost like a sponge, that what you're trying to do is, when you squeeze it, just as you squeeze it, it just takes everything out of there, and you're taking all the toxins. You can imagine that. So all the toxins, everything, and that's just being recycled in the body, right? Lymphatic system, how that goes. But when you let go, what's going to happen? It's going to absorb, and it's absorbing all the nutrition and the fresh blood from the capillaries around it. So when we talk about people just staying in flexion, I'm going, well, if this is your disc, you're going to need that so that you can get nutrition everywhere, right? And that's not necessarily the case, because everyone's in flexion. So isn't it interesting that as part of a treatment protocol for herniated discs, you would include extension work? And one of the interesting things with that is, when people do extension work, the pain that's kind of going down the leg, that would typically happen with the disc issue because of irritation of the nerves around it. But what would happen with the extension work is that the pain should typically recede and go back, you know, to be localized in the back, so localized around that disc area. So from a chiropractic perspective, loading, oh man, that's massive, right? Because now I'm asking muscle spasms, I'm asking what joint is being loaded too much or too little. Then we've got stuck joints, which there's too much load in that space. And then you've got hypermobile joints, which are just going to, you know, all of that. It's going to kind of get stuck as well. And it's just a vicious cycle. Then we're talking about inflammation. Kind of go back to that big chronic inflammation thing that is popping up in almost everything I'm researching. It's crazy. And so then now you're kind of looking at, can we go back to the basics, right? Let's talk about loading, let's talk about movement, because those are the basics. So I mean, it's really, really interesting.
Yeah. And what you mentioned before, we spoke about before, with regards to nutrition, stress and inflammation are the biggest causes of all these factors. You know, if you get yourself into a certain body position and it's held there, that's a form of stress. You know, being held captive in a position when you're dying to move, that's imprisonment. That's stress, you know. So the moment we kind of can remove stresses from the body, then that's one way of kind of fixing fixing your posture and fixing where it might be dysfunctional. And at the same time, you're looking at sugars and diet. So the moment you have any inflammatory markers, sugar being the number one, we all know how bad sugar is, but do we really know how bad sugar is? People say, oh no, sugar's bad. Yeah, we know that. But then you look at their diet and it's just like, well, so? Yeah, it's just like, heroin's bad for you. So, and they just, yeah, I know. I know that it's bad, but they're still shooting at.
I mean, it's the same with cigarettes and alcohol and, all of and chaos in your life and not managing emotional stress. But what's interesting for me is I think my position on it has changed slightly.
Okay.
Because I think I'm trying to ruminate on this idea of why do we have $1 trillion health industry? Okay, like and it just really doesn't make sense. And then I'm going, okay, we've got this body that is beautifully designed, right? I mean, incredibly designed to the point that we don't fully understand how it functions. A lot of the research, people exploring ideas on, hey, maybe this is happening because of this, and so that's kind of what's happening is you've got the body as it's designed and then science chasing after it, not the other way around, which I think most people seem to forget. But I think what I'm thinking, at least, and this is me exploring the idea, that I think as beautifully as it's designed, I think we come into the world already in a state of, or at least from a negative space of health. Okay.
Sure.
And why I'm saying this is because there's studies that show that stress from a mother while she's pregnant can have negative impacts on a baby, an unborn child.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's psychological studies that they've done on, I think they did a cherry blossom study on fear in rats, where they basically were looking at the idea that if they put, I think it was the scent of the cherry blossom, and if they kind of tortured the parents, right? What would happen is that every time they, smelled the cherry blossom, it was this idea that same fight or flight mode was stimulated, right? Then these rats or mice had kids, and these kids weren't exposed to the torture. But when they were exposed to the cherry blossom, well, they had the same, fight or flight reaction.
A Pavlovian response,
yeah. And so that's really interesting because that's already and it may sound very pessimistic, and this is me exploring ideas, which I kind of love to do, but what if we actually started from a negative, right? Yeah. And then you come into a world where there's social stress, there's environmental stress, there's emotional stress, and oftentimes then you're starting to talk about child stress, then biological stress, because if people think genetically, it's like, well, my mom had type 2 diabetes, so it's a genetic issue in my family. And it's like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
You all ate the same. And so because you shared the same lifestyle, right? If your mom ate that way and you came and ate that way and you have type 2 diabetes, it's not genetic, it's lifestyle, right? Exactly. And even if it is genetic, right? We know genetically, at least now with epigenetics, they're showing that we have the ability to change our DNA, how our DNA actually communicates. Or so here's the thing: is what if we actually found ourselves in a position of saying, well, we have this ability to be really healthy and to have a really great quality of life, but we're not starting from there. We're actually starting from a negative. How do we move from here and move to that point? Sure. And that's going to come with the mindfulness and the learning so I think in primary school, we should be talking about, physiology. How does the body work? How does the brain work? Because then I think we're shifting it from oh, this is just what happens to me, to, okay, this is what you need to do to empower, to give you the quality of life that you actually can live, right?
That's so important, especially from such a young age. There's Actually, that what you said is so cool, because I had a notion a while back and actually coined it. There's a whole saying like the sins of the father. So the moment, the moment, if I have a genetic predisposition to diabetes and a heart problem, which I do, my dad was diabetic, he had a heart issue. In no means is it a predetermined thing in your history. You know, he smoked a lot and he didn't eat overly healthy. So you invited all these things. So your body kind of has you know, all the markers for dysfunction. And with the dysfunction comes heart problems and diabetes. And as you say now, I wonder, or I think quite correctly, is that you can actually have that imprint into your DNA, and then you pass on that dysfunction through your code, your genetic code. And then your kids are inheriting your failures of your personal health. So I think it's such an investment into your lineage if you yourself look after yourself. So if I'm healthy and I do a lot of exercise and I eat well, then my genes are going to be altered. And then when I have kids, they have a fighting chance to make the right decisions, coupled with the positive backing that I've done on my side. And if they can just continue that, if they can maintain that investment, then our particular family or your particular family or anyone's particular family is going to be on that trajectory towards overall health, you know, your kids. And then as a collective, if we can all do that, then we are on the path to kind of global health. But it starts off with the individual. So that's really the individual can affect and can elicit a big movement, at least within your own genealogy, you know, within your own family. And I think that's such a big thing. You know, how many parents were like, my kid's always sick, you know, I'm taking him to the doctor. It's like, okay, why? And then you can review their diet and to a large degree, their genetic predisposition, which is in no part your fault, which in no part is your granddad's fault and your great-granddad's fault. So where does the buck stop? When do we keep blaming our genetics? And when do we intervene and say, no, it stops with me. I'm going to make the decision. I'm going to alter my genes trajectory so that the people that come after me, who are my family and people I love, will have a better, healthy chance. That's invaluable. We want to leave them a fortune, but we don't want to leave them a genetic wealth. You know what I mean? So,
I love that. And I think, you know, what we're touching on is why, you know, and I ask my patients, you know, and why are you doing this, right? It's not easy. It's not easy to, you know, and for a lot of people, it's like, man, I know I'm supposed to be exercising, but it's so hard, and there's things, you know, always going on. It's like, I know, you know, because guess what? Life is hard, you know, and if you think, you know, and if you come from that space where it's like, your job is really to try and manage the chaos in your life, because we're surrounded by it. We are surrounded by chaos. So how can you manage that chaos? And a massive part of it is managing your health. And so what does that look like? And I'm guilty, and it's so funny, and probably get very vulnerable here, but it's become something quite close to my heart. So recently diagnosed with lupus, autoimmune condition. So basically, the idea for people that don't know what it is that your immune system knows how to identify bacteria, you know, bad bacteria and viruses, and it's supposed to attack those and then get rid of them, right? So that's how, when you get sick, your lymph nodes up, your immune system fighting all of that stuff. Well, in an autoimmune condition, what happens is that the body actually starts fighting itself. Right. So, I mean, there's a whole host of things, but what's been really interesting is looking at just how much self-neglect has to do with a formation of something like an autoimmune condition. Why am I saying this? Well, one, things like insomnia, where you're not sleeping well, so you're not actually healing, right? Another thing is food, is what are you eating? And if you're eating food that's going to be destroying your gut and your gut lining, well, the immune system is so closely related to the gut and to the brain, and there's so much research around that.
Absolutely.
And then you've got the idea of exercise, and so if I had to look back at it, I think what was really interesting was the whole time wasn't like I was saying to myself, I'm not going to take care of myself. What had happened was I had said I had a goal of becoming a chiropractor. And so whatever I needed to do to get there was what I would do.
Whatever that path was,
for some reason, my thinking around that wasn't necessarily, well, one of the things you have to do is take care of yourself so you can be a chiropractor. It was almost like hey, take my body and slave drive it to the goal.
Yeah.
Instead of going, let me take care of you like I would take care of someone else. Let's negotiate our way through this. And if I had, I think a lot of the things would have been vastly different. Sure. What's interesting is autoimmune conditions are, I think they say about 70% in women. And if you look at the change in culture amongst Black women when it comes to, and you know, some people agree with this and some people may not, but women are very empathetic and intuitive. So energetically absorb stress from their environments very, very easily.
Sure.
And we go back to stress and we go back to inflammation, right? And so kind of looking at the whole thing where it's like, if you speak to women, I literally had someone come in with back pain. And I just asked the simple questions. Okay, how are you? Okay, so biologically, we know that there's something going on here. Psychologically, what's going on there? Yeah. Antidepressants? Anxiety? Yes. Insomnia? Yes. Okay, well, there we go. Social. Let's look at the social questions. Quick. Tick, tick, tick. Social. What's going on there? Divorced? Okay. Stress? Right. Work? 18-hour week? There we go. Stress? Right. And then I didn't even get to the spiritual part because now I just added that to my biopsychosocial and now I'm adding spiritual. And it goes back to the thinking and the awareness thing. And not to say you can't go back, and I think that's the exciting thing, is kind of going, okay, well, this is where I'm at, and this is now having to change the direction of how I'm choosing to live my life. Yeah. But the big why isn't necessary. Okay, it's quality of life, because I think it's really great to be able to do things I love, but it's generations after me. Like, what's my family going to, you know, what am I giving my family? Am I going to just pass on the trauma?
Absolutely,
am I going to pass on? Yeah. So, and the why is so important in healing.
Yeah, it's exactly what you said. Things can become very psychosomatic. We manifest, you know, our state of minds physically, and vice versa. What we spoke about before was that quintessential bullied child at school, that bullied person. You know, you can see their posture because they've been picked on, and so there's you can see their psychological state by their posture alone, or vice versa. Right. You can tell what their posture is going to be by their psychological state. You know, so if we reverse one, it will pull the other. It's like a ball on a string, two balls on a string. You can't pull this one without affecting the other. So it's like scales, really. You know, they're going to tip either way. They can't tip independently of one another. It's one lever, and they operate in unison. You know, so I think that's where treatment has really might have taken a big turn, where it's not just here's a needle, click, you're done. No, and when what you're doing is great, you're unpacking more than just the physical ailment, you know. So one thing I want to chat to you about is, apart from that Fix My Posture, you've got another business called Wheat Relief, where you got wheat bags. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so that started at the same time as Fix My Posture. And how that kind of started was I would needle my patients, and for those that have been dry needled know that you get post-needle soreness, which is the nature of it. I'm hurting you to heal you, basically, but
creating trauma.
You know, so and controlled trauma, which is very, very interesting. So
that's a big one.
And so I would say to them, well, when you go home, just put a wheat bag or a hot water bottle. And in Zim, most people were like, either they didn't have any of that or they just had the hot water bottle. And I mean, I've had some terrible experiences with the hot water bottle. I mean, I've had it leak in my bed, and you know, I've heard of people getting burned terribly from them. And the other thing is, I just didn't like the fact that they, you know, you see, you put them in, but they don't necessarily like mold to your body like a wheat bag. Because, and I just love that idea that I could bring another element of natural pain therapy to this. And it's something that I used often, you know, in terms of like for period pain, back pain, neck pain, if I had any sort of tension, headache, just kind of popping that microwave into, popping the wheat bag into the microwave.
Sure.
And yeah, and so what the idea of the heat is really the same concept as the needle, except the needle has some neurological things that, you know, we can add to it. But just the idea that you're bringing in more blood supply. So when the muscles are in spasm, they tend to cut off your micro blood supply. So you're looking at your capillaries, so nutrition in, toxins out.
Yeah.
Right. And so one of the things that happens is that it starts to create chronic inflammation in that space, because even though there's no toxin removal, you're still technically using the muscle because it's in constant contraction. Yes. So because of that, it's creating all these what we call metabolites, which is just like dirt, basically, the toxins. And then it just keeps on, you know, so, and as that happens is chronic inflammation. Yeah. And then you've got all these substances that are formed from chronic inflammation that end up causing another cycle of chronic inflammation, you know, so it's almost like the cycle that happens. And so what we're trying to do is really flush out that muscle as much as possible. So I was just like, hey, you know, the wheat bags are great. And you know, from an entrepreneurial perspective, really trying to figure out how to have more than one line of income. I think we're constantly seeing that on Instagram and stuff, like have 7 lines of income. I have no idea how people are doing that, because everything
side hustles all around.
I know. So I think from a business perspective, which is a part of the life game that I really enjoy, I wanted to see what it was like to run a business. My practice never felt like a business. I think when I think of my patients, and we spoke about this the last time, when I think of my patients, chiropractic practice, it's not a job for me, you know.
No, of course, yeah.
And so, yeah. So I didn't, from an entrepreneurial perspective, didn't feel satisfied with like running a chiropractic practice, and maybe it'll be different now that I own my own like actual practice and I have to do admin. Yeah. So, you know, but I think, so that was cool. And then we just added, we made it in this African themed, you know.
I see that, yeah, with the big 5.
Yeah. Yeah. So which was cool. And it was just like the African story, right? Like, I love Africa. I really do. Yeah. And if you can throw me into the bush and get all my patients to follow me to the bush, wink, wink, that would be great. It's not going to happen though. And then somehow what was amazing is I got a business partner. And so we actually send some bags to the States. So we've actually got some of our bags in Washington at the moment in the chiropractic office.
That's cool.
Yeah. So that's been awesome.
That's very cool. That's awesome. Because for people that don't know, we actually work together at Cryo, and so one of my interesting questions for you is the contrast of heat therapy versus cold therapy. So we had you know, with the cryogenic chambers and the localized cryo in conjunction with wheat bags and heat, and massage alone is very kind of thermogenic. It does get that heat built up. So for yourself, do you lean more towards heat as a therapy, or would you somehow involve cold more often? Or yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking about. Would you lean more towards heat as a post-recovery or as a preventative type of thing, more so than cold? Or do you find there's a balance between the two? Which would you apply, and in which scenario do you find is more relevant?
So I think for me personally, it's very, I think actually, which is quite interesting that you asked that. So from practice wise, I suppose I probably lean towards more heat, and that's just typically what I tell my patients because I see a lot of chronic pain patients. But that's not to say we don't use cold. So the wheat bag, which is really cool, is you can actually freeze the wheat bag. The wheat, is temperature sensitive, and I really liked that about it, right? Because then, something against the hot water bottle again is that, you could actually put it into a Ziploc bag, the wheat bag into a Ziploc bag and put it into the freezer.
Yeah.
And use it for cold or heat, right? Typically, I would suggest cold for people that have an acute issue because then there's, some swelling in there. So, and sometimes I get some of my chronic pain patients that actually have swelling in that area. So, we play. Sometimes I'll actually tell people to do a combination of cold and hot. So I'll tell them a few minutes of cold and then straight after hot, because that actually increases the flushing.
Yeah.
So it kind of just goes back to the physiology behind it all, right? What cold is doing is when you're cold, your body takes the blood from your extremities and takes it to your organs, because what it's trying to do is protect your organs in winter, the proverbial winter. So we're using that. And the idea of that is once that area is heated up again, well, the blood's going to rush back there, and then we've got that concept of nutrition in, toxin out. So that's like what I typically say, nutrition in, toxin out. You can break it down further into like your biochemistry, your factors, and all of that stuff. But from a basic level, that's what we're saying, right? Your heat is just that instead of actually pulling, the majority of the blood away from that area, what you're doing is just stimulating more heat to that area, because what your body then is, when you're hot, your body's trying to take the heat away from the organs and take it to the extremities. And so that's just what's going to happen. It's just going to bring the heat to there. So it really somewhat depends. I think the one thing, if I could, my dream practice would actually have a combination of both. I would have a cryo machine, because I think for chronic pain, and you look at and autoimmune conditions, that cryo machine is incredible. It just really, it resets stuff in there, and it's just like really, really amazing to see what cold actually does to the body. And then looking at stuff like, from the heat perspective, is stuff like infrared. What that does is also plays along the same, pathways that you're looking at, like painkillers, like NSAIDs and painkillers, which I encourage my patients away from that. And why I say so is because NSAIDs negatively affect the joints, and oftentimes don't actually help with the muscle pain, because the problem with the muscle is muscle spasm. Right? So when you take an anti-inflammatory, maybe you're reducing the inflammation, but you're not fixing the problem. So once again, we're taking our mind, and then we're affecting the joints, and most people actually don't consume nearly enough like collagen, in a sense. Which is very interesting, because collagen has also these studies that were showing that people that have taken they've seen like changes on an X-ray. So they've actually, was it an X-ray or an MRI? It was one of those, but they've actually, I think it must have been an MRI, but they've seen changes in the anatomy. So they've seen changes in the anatomy of the knee just post collagen. So that I thought degeneration of this is done. But yeah, we're learning in this. So yeah.
So it's fascinating. And the cool thing about these wheat bags is that you are able to kind of administer it by yourself. So you got pretty much your own home therapy at the same time. So the portability nature of everything of that is as good. So whether I'm telling my clients to get themselves a small foam roller or a little ball for that kind of muscle release, these wheat bags are great because they put them in the microwave, put them in the sun for, you know, and you've got that form of kind of at-home therapy. And in these unprecedented times where we kind of still for the large part working from home, it's cool to kind of just have something at your disposal that you can just kind of pop in the microwave and drape over your shoulder, or lay on your stomach and put on your lower back, just to kind of get that simulation of exertion in the form of getting the heat to your center. I think that's also very, very important. That's so. Do you utilize a lot of like that foam rolling or kind of self-myofascial release at all?
I like that. Well, it's kind of so I haven't really done foam rolling. Within my practice, what I've done is I've worked a lot with a bio. So I refer a lot of my patients to the bio. Are you still? So I think we've frozen again.
I can hear you. There we go.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Okay. Sorry. We're here again. So I referred a lot of my patients. Yeah. So I refer a lot of my patients through to I've got like one or two personal trainers that I've enjoyed working with, because I think they're also very conscious of injury and you know, and conscious of like the relationship between two people, you know, in terms of like sometimes you have practitioners or clinicians that want to do everything themselves, and I think that's detrimental to trying to, you know, manage our patients. So I've got a few personal trainers that I think we work well together.
Good.
And then I've got a biokineticist, which I quite like sending to her, because, you know, it's just having someone assess people's movement and then start off, you know, training from that position. So I think she does more of the foam rolling stuff. In terms of like self-management, fascial stuff, I teach my patients posture in the room. That's typically on the second visit. So we do posture, we do stretching, and typically the stretching is based off of whatever tightness I'm seeing, whatever weakness I'm seeing. We'll maybe do some form of strengthening. And that's like the second visit, but I'm often telling them, hey, this is very, very basic. Like this is not necessarily, you know, everything that you should be doing, but this is just, my goal is that people are not reliant on chiropractic. I'm saying to them, yes, I can help you. One, I want to, you know, see you more times now because of the pain management. You know, pain management kind of shifts things. Yeah. So we have to reset systems. We've got to kind of go through flare-ups and that's just okay. I may need to see you a couple of times now, and then throw you into maintenance program where it's like you're just kind of taking care of your body. But in that stage of pain management, I'm sending them to other people. So that's kind of where all the other stuff like the foam rolling and the stretching and exercises and stuff come. And then the one other thing that I think I tell people to do, which is quite funny, is ischemic compression. So that's basically what it is. It's just like, I'll just take my elbow and I'll, like, if it's in the glute and there's a knot in the glute, I'll put my elbow into that myofascial trigger point. And what will happen is horrible. And I've got a lot of terrible nicknames from that. But I like, so I put it in there and then you release it and it kind of helps get blood supply to the area, stuff we've spoken about. Now, what I do is if someone's partners come in, then I'll teach them how to do ischemic compression. Yeah. The only thing though is that for some reason they never do it as, you know, they're not as intense as I am, because I think they fear what could happen if they are.
There's repercussions.
So, yeah, there's always repercussions. So
there's no repercussions for you.
You never do it like that. Yeah, no.
Yeah, you never do it like Dr. Blumears does it, because I'm not a doctor. The doctor part of it should be the big giveaway.
Yeah.
We spoke about as well, you know, down to like hypermobility and hyperflexibility and all factors like that. So what was I thinking of? So when it comes down to like hypermobility, hyperflexibility, and we get to kind of these joint pains, a lot of my clients have had the urge to, some people I've met before, like new clients, they said, no, I sometimes just, I can click my own back, I can click my own neck. And this whole realm of self-adjusting is quite interesting. You know, I catch myself doing it too, you know, because I'm in the industry, in a sense, in the fitness world, you know, I know bodies and muscles and movement. I'm like, oh, if I just do this, bang, you know, and then you develop these little bad habits of just, you know, when you click here and click there, and you do it once, and you do it 4 times, and you do it 8 times, you do it 16 times, all of a sudden you're constantly doing something. Is there inherent danger of self-manipulating versus, you know, going to someone like a professional manipulator, in a sense, to have it done kind of screened and scanned, and well, this area needs to be mobilized, so we're going to focus on that, versus people who are just at home grabbing the necks and cracking their own heads, you know. So what are the major negative effects for self-adjusting, you know?
Yeah, so I always, so this question pops up in my office a lot, and I'm going to see if I can quickly draw what I typically draw for my patients.
Okay.
And so let's see if you can see what type of an artist I am, right? in my past life. Okay, so basically, so this is the brain. If that's not very clear, that's the brain. Okay. And so these would be your vertebrae, right? So within your spine, if you were looking at it from the back. Sure. And the idea is that you've got joints that kind of sit, next to the vertebrae. So you've got these joints that sit here. So when you're self-adjusting, typically you're adjusting, the joints that sit next to the okay. When I say next to the spine, what it is, it's actually connecting one vertebrae to the vertebrae at the bottom. But they just mobile, and that allows the movement, so the rotation, the flexion, the extension, right? Now, what happens is if you've got a stuck joint, okay, because your brain isn't necessarily going to shut you down for a stuck joint, what it's going to do is just cause hypermobility at the joints above and below the stuck joint, okay? Now, what tends to happen with that is that when you're self-adjusting, because it's not very specific, what you're doing is actually moving the hypermobile joints, right? Okay. And all that popping sound that that most people, the popping sound just gives you some like psychological form of relief for some people. Yeah. But the other thing it does is it actually does make you feel better. And why? Because the nerve supply actually, and so this is a very simple drawing because you've got the spinal cord and everything. But the idea here is that the nerve supply isn't just to one joint and back up. What it is it kind of runs to about, if I'm right, it's about 3. So when you self-adjust a hypermobile joint, it makes you feel better because the nerve innervation or the communication is the same as the stuck joint. So it kind of gives you like a false idea that you're feeling better and that you fix the problem. Because remember, pain and discomfort is all your body's trying to say, something's wrong in this area, we need to fix it. Sure. So if you give the brain the perception that you've actually given the input into that area, then it thinks things are okay, but the problem is still there. So when a chiropractor is adjusting, a chiropractor isn't just kind of trying to get popping sounds, and I love the videos on YouTube, I really do, and I might start doing them one day. But chiropractic's a lot more complex than just purely getting popping sounds, because anyone can get popping sounds. Yeah. The thing with chiropractic is we have the skill, or at least they train us to be able to identify which is the actual stuck joint, because otherwise all I'm doing is I'm coming in and moving just the hypermobile joints like you are as well. Yeah. But when you can find the actual stuck joint, then what I'm doing is once that's actually released, a lot of my patients will then say to me, I can't self-adjust like I used to before. And I'm like, yeah, no, you can't, because we've actually managed to reduce the hypermobility in the joints because of the hypomobility in the diseased joint, in the diseased facet joint, and the hypermobility in the compensatory facets or joints that then are actually going to become diseased as well, and then it's just going to be a vicious cycle.
So in essence, with the hypermobility side of things, you have an already mobile joint or an already over mobile joint that you're in actual fact making even more unstable. So you're taking something that's loose and loosening it even more. Therefore, the area that was tight is going to be tightening up more to compensate for the extra loosening. So you're in actual fact doing more in the long term to tighten up and damage the area that you think you're trying to correct.
Yeah, and then you can add to that remember the brain's massive, one of the brain's major functions is protection.
Yeah.
So if it feels like something's moving too much and it shouldn't be, well, guess what it's going to do? It's going to cause muscle spasm in that area. And then now your hypermobile joint has muscle spasm around it. And now all of a sudden you've got this movement. Now, why is all of this important? Well, one, because you're going to start forming myofascial trigger points in those areas. And that's just a site for inflammation in that area. Two, when you've got muscle spasm, you're not going to have healthy joint movement in a space where people already don't know how to move their joints properly anyways, right? So now we've got reduced movement in a limited space of movement. That's the other problem. And then we've got all these compensatory factors. Then we've got pain, right? And then the psychological effect of pain is fear avoidance syndrome. So now people are scared to move their neck because of what's kind of going on. Or then you just have this constant habit of self-adjusting. But I mean, you can see that so it's one of those things where it's like everything's got a consequence and everything's got an effect. What are you doing and what are you trying to, what is your aim and what is your goal, right? Are you trying to fix the cause of the problem? And it might make you feel better, but so do painkillers. And so do, which is so interesting, and I think in our next talk, we're going to be talking a little bit about, psychedelics and pain management and that, and an exploratory conversation. But isn't it interesting that make you feel better? Antidepressants are another thing that make you feel better. We're not asking what are they doing, and so that's really the question of what's happening. And that's, I don't know, I think chiropractic is doing a better job in coming in and explaining it from a, before it was a very philosophical practice, which is important. I think you have to have the philosophy behind it, but now it's starting to be a lot more, starting to talk about biomechanics, which what we were really talking about here, loading, unloading, stuck joint, unstuck joint, disc movement, lack of nutrition, inflammation. What are we looking, the stuff that we're looking at there, and it's not bone out of place as much as inflammation can be, really causing your sciatica. How interesting is that? Muscle tightness, glute weakness can cause your sciatica. So we're starting to see that, from a chiropractic perspective, there's more to it than just the philosophy, which, we can explain why we're getting results, which is really exciting.
It's all cause and effect, so I'm glad to see the realms of chiropractics delving deeper into just going for the pop, as you say. And I think that's possibly where, excuse me, I think that's possibly where chiropractic, as with many fields, might have gotten a bad name. I know people that have gone to personal trainers. I don't like personal trainers because the personal trainer hurt my shoulder. Well, maybe you just had a shit personal trainer. No two people are created the same, and no practice within a practice is the same. And it's good to see these progressions. Chiropractic is out of my realm of expertise, but what I've observed from my side is that the conversation was very much go in there, click, go in there, click, go in there, click, and it's pretty much the same thing. But the way you're doing it now, it's so amazing to find out that while we're delving deeper, we're going to just, instead of just blowing the smoke away to try to eliminate the fire. We're going to, well, we need to put the fire out, and then we need to eliminate the cause of the fire. We need to kind of deconstruct everything. And we're going right back to neurological conditions and social stresses. So how deep can we extrapolate? How deep can we unpack things to find out where the cause is? And it's so cool to see, you know. So I'm sure, like, again, because we're talking about chiropractics, the criticisms of chiropractics when it comes to the fact that, well, all they're doing is just breaking your neck, you know, kicking your back, you know. And it's just like, I think it's more than just that. You know, my personal experience is that I believe in the pure mechanical movement of a body. Years ago, with all the sport and things I did, you know, I had a vertebra in my back that was a little bit out, and you could physically feel it. You run your fingers down my spine. Oh, this one is a little bit out. If I stood and I turned my head to the side, that felt good. If I turned my head this way, I felt my mid-back stiff and tight. So I went to a chiropractor and said, well, this is a bit out. Bang, pop, run there. It felt smooth. I turned my head. The pain was gone and everything felt smooth. Boom, bang, bang. Right. But again, what caused that vertebra to come out is a question that needed to be asked. And it might have been pattern recognition from bodyboarding a certain way or being right hand dominant, doing a repetitive motion. So whereas chiropractics in that regard fixed the issue in the instant, it didn't fix the cause. And the cause was, I now need information as to how to prevent that. So where we are now and what you're doing is amazing, where we say, okay, this is going to give you that temporary relief. This is going to fix the way you feel now so that you can function and you can have a clear mind to acknowledge where the faults are and then try go to the grassroots and fix it from there. Because generally when people are in pain, the last thing they want to do is to study and discover and explore. I'm like, I just feel like crap. I want to feel better now. I don't have time. I don't have the gumption to delve into how was my childhood and all those type of things. But if you can give them that temporary relief, like how do you feel? Oh, that feels good. So it will come back unless you address this. And what I've given you now is breathing room, psychologically and physiologically. You've got breathing room now. You've broken the surface. You still the tide's still rising, but you can breathe and you can gather your thoughts and you can replan and reevaluate what got you in the first place. And now you got a fighting chance to fix that issue. And I think that's where you guys might be. I'm not speaking for you, but I see with the way that we discuss. And when we work together, and when I got treated by you as well, that's exactly what I enjoyed about it and feel quite positive for all the the naysayers in the past, you know. And I've had friends that brought like, go see a chiropractor. No, they only do this and that. I said, have you ever gone to one? No. I'm like, then you don't know, do you? You know?
Yeah, and also if you've gone to a chiropractor and you know that chiropractor didn't work for you, go try another chiropractor. You know, and you because I find that like we treat differently. We have very different perspectives. We've got, you know, and I'm okay. I have detached my identity from chiropractic. If chiropractic is not the thing to work for you, I'm sincerely hoping the least I can do is give you the right direction into what can.
Sure.
That's really where I'm at this point. I'm like, I'm not going to argue with you whether you believe or don't believe in chiropractic. I've seen some incredible things in the last, I mean, I've really been practicing for 2 years, but we started adjusting when we were in our 4th year. So, I mean, I've been doing this now for almost, it's like four years now. And there's some incredible things that have happened, like people that were told that they'd never feel again. And I was in like chiropractic school, like I was at the campus clinic. And this is, she was told, she was a paraplegic, and she was told, if you don't have any feeling after 4 years, like that's it. This is what it is for the rest of your life. And she was coming for chiropractic treatment, and we were doing spinal mobilization, we were doing nerve, you know, flossing and and I mean, it was insane. She started having bladder control. And I was sitting here, I was watching this, and I was going, our body is incredible. The design is miraculous in itself. It is divine, honestly, and we're chasing after it. And if chiropractic isn't the thing that works for you, that doesn't mean chiropractic doesn't work. It just didn't work for you, and that's okay, because this whole thing is a individual biopsychosocial spiritual, that's my new one, process. So hey, if chiropractic's not working for you, and so some people come in and say to me, oh, physiotherapy did nothing. I'm like, hey, maybe physiotherapy didn't work for you, but that doesn't mean physiotherapy doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So, and it's the quest of you being able to find what works for you.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, right? But it just plays on mindset as well, because sometimes you're fighting with people that have identified with their pain, that have identified with their disease, and it's easy to do that. It's harder to separate yourself from, and especially like you're saying, pain is interesting because it does. There's something called chronic pain-induced depression. That's a thing. That's a thing. When you've been in pain for long enough, you can actually have depression from that. You can actually have anxiety from that. And so what they're trying to do is study and figure out, why is that? What's the connection there, right? Between the depression and the chronic pain. You look at chronic pain and brain fog, and those are all real
forgetfulness
things, forgetfulness. And so even then, now I can challenge clinicians and trainers, right? Because if you're dealing with someone who's been in chronic pain for a really long time, and they come into your practice and they're angry, they're frustrated, they're depressed, and they're coming in going, this isn't going to work. I have patients that will come in and go, I've got no pain yet. I'm going, no. Functionally, you've had no pain for 2 days. I'm holding on to that. And sometimes that's, and it's because the brain is kind of going like, well, this is what it is. So I then challenge clinicians and trainers and, to really say, okay, where are you on the empathy scale? Where are you on the patience scale with people with chronic pain? And that is another situation, because then we can look back to what's happening with our clinicians. Are our clinicians healthy? Are they dealing with depression, anxiety themselves? Are they struggling? And we know those things reduce empathy. They reduce patience. So this whole thing, when we talk about unpacking, I'm like, oh my goodness, like there's so much that's contributing to all of this. And maybe that's why we actually have $1 trillion industry, right? Because what it is.
I think they just need to smoke a joint. We touched on that, everyone's talking about their various forms of therapy, and to completely disregard all aspects of therapy, no matter how deep into history that you go, it's quite naive. So I suppose also it's depending on your geography. If you live in an area that's quite conservative in nature, it ostracizes many forms of help and aid. I would say, I'm not picking on the bodybuilding industry, but if you go to a traditional franchise gym, the nature of the gym is geared towards bodybuilding, which is fine. But if you're a first timer and you're going to go into a gym, what is presented to you is the world of bodybuilding, given the nature that the space is filled up with machines that are geared toward isolation and bodybuilding. And when those people are training that way, the mindset then becomes isolated and bodybuilding. And then the vernacular and the term and everything becomes geared towards that, and then becomes a concentrated version, a concentrated kind of pool of bodybuilders. Again, which is fine. That's just an example of what happens when things are in isolation. When you have an island, amazing things evolutionary happen when they're in containment or on an island. If you take a philosophy and isolate it, that philosophy just becomes a more fundamental version of itself down the line. It doesn't become diverse, if you know what I mean. So I think if we can embrace the diverse nature of therapies out there, chiropractics, that doesn't work for you. Try physio, that doesn't work for you. Try Pilates. I'm a bodybuilder, I don't do Pilates. I'm a yoga instructor, I don't lift weights. You know, we are, this is one thing, you know, exercise and health. Health is one thing made up of subgenres of, you know, therapies and development and performance and psychological stress and meditation and spiritual life and physical growth, performance enhancement. There's so many branches in this health term. And, you know, if you want to exist on one branch, awesome. But then you're going to only bear the fruit from that one branch. And there's so much out there to kind of hop around and jump into, that if you were to tackle, or if you were to try, your relief or your growth might come from these different branches that you're willing to leap onto. You know, it's crazy. And then again, when you're talking about the more legal side of things, when you're looking at these type of drugs, for example, sure, you got a bit of pain, they'll prescribe you every pill under the sun. I'm not knocking the pharmaceutical industry, but if you go to the doctor for medical advice, if you go to the doctor, you go in there for pills. You know, that's what you're going to get, which is fine. Pills work. I'm a big fan of modern medicine. They're awesome. But there's other things too that you could add to it. Again, a little disclaimer, I'll never say you will not listen to this doctor, listen to me. What I know, I'm not a doctor. What I'm saying is that coupled with that, there are things that you can add to it. You know, I'd never say to a client of mine, you know, don't stop seeing that person. I'd phone that professional and say, I'm seeing this patient, I'm seeing this client. They're seeing you for XYZ reason. I want to proceed with this. Will it conflict with what you have planned? I said, well, you might want to avoid this. Oh, thank you very much. This is where I'm going to go. So you know where I'm going to take them. And where can we meet in the middle? So I think professionals need to start interacting more so than what they are. So
yeah, I mean, you know, and I do the same with my patients in my room. I'll say to them, you know, because type 2 diabetes is a big thing, and blood pressure medications, you know, people are just kind of put on them, you know. And especially type 2 diabetes frustrates me. I think blood pressure medication, I'm a little bit like, I don't know. It's been one of those things where I think type 2 diabetes, my frustration is that, I mean, I read a book by a nephrologist, so that's a doctor in what they call mainstream medicine.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That's really talking about the fact that, like, putting people on type 2, you know, with type 2 diabetes on metformin or medication does not make sense. And especially for the fact that they're overweight, they're eating really badly. Like, my one patient says to me, oh, I didn't tell you I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in December, and they put me on medication. And so I'm going, okay, so what's the plan? You know, and she goes, well, I mean, my sugar levels have been dropping quite low lately because I stopped drinking all the fizzy drinks and I'm not taking in as much sugar. And I'm going,
surprise, surprise.
Oh. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay, can we talk? So I never tell my patients come off medication. It's not my scope of practice, right?
Of course. Yeah.
What I tell them is, hey, this is the information that I have on this. Let's work on your diet and let me explain to you. Let's sit down, give me a food diary. So I'll say to them, give me a 3-day food diary. And let's sit down and let's see what is what you're eating turning into what you think it is.
Yeah.
And then they'll come in and it's like, well, I'm having my, you know, black tea with black, you know, the tanganda is what we call it in Zimbabwe, but it's or coffee. So I'll have my coffee with my milk and my sugar, and then I'll have 2 slices of bread, and so we sit down and we start talking about the very simple fact of, hey, guess what? This turns to sugar, this turns to sugar, this turns to sugar. Okay. When you're not using up as much, you know, in your daytime, right? are you a sugar burner or a fat burner? Because if you're a sugar burner and you're adding more sugar, you're going to stay a sugar burner. And then what's simply happening is your glucose your cells in your body are so full of glucose, and they need the key. So the idea is that your insulin is the key that opens the cell to allow glucose into the cells, right? But if you've been consuming so much sugar and your cells are saturated with sugar already, you don't need another key to come and open to shove more sugar into the cell. No. That's not what's going to happen. And you're going to have, your glucose in your bloodstream. And so when we start looking at that, then you start talking about, oh, well, okay, type 2 diabetes, we need to give you medication. It's like, no, what we need to do is reduce the amount of glucose in your system, turn you from a sugar burner to a fat burner, and then you're going to see. And so I say to them, stay on your medication, but watch your levels. Because as soon as your levels start dropping low, go back to your GP and have the conversation again. Yes. Because I had one patient that was on 3 different types of diabetic medication. 3 different types. 1 month into the diet, and I'm not talking about a complex, crazy diet here. I mean, I'm talking very simple. We're cutting out carbs. We're cutting out your just grains, sugar, milk. Really simple. Simple. And in the first month, he was off the third thing of his diabetic medication. His blood pressure had normalized for the first time in months. They're connected. They're possibly connected in a massive way. And so I get you. When I don't come into this space going, 1, I'm a know-it-all, 2, I'll overstep onto my peers' space. That's not what I'm doing. I'm simply educating my patients with the knowledge that I have, or directing them to people that I know have more knowledge about a particular thing than I do. Of course. That's the thing. And then it goes, if you just follow this, let's see what happens. I don't make promises, even with chiropractic. I don't ever make promises. Let's see what chiropractic can do for you. Yeah. And then they start seeing, and what it is agency and showing up, doing stuff. So yeah, I mean, this health thing is really interesting. It's complicated in the fact that there are so many paths to take. But if you pick one path, it's the simplest thing. Yeah. It can be so simple. Yeah. Show up. I think you need to show up, yeah. And repeat. Rocking up and repeating. That's all it is. It's basically just, I'm here, I'm going to do the same, not the same thing, but I'm going to do what I need to do today. And then tomorrow I'm going to do it again. Tomorrow I'm going to do it again. Next time I'm going to do it again. I think also when a lot of people, what they do, they want all the solutions immediately. So they want all the answers, they want all the gains, they want all the therapies and all the cures within a week. And they don't understand that your degeneration to this dysfunctional state or this pain took time. It took a while to get there. But unknown to yourself, it took a while to get there. You thought it was overnight because you're feeling crappy now. But the moment you realize that, listen, let's go back in time. You've been sitting at that desk for 8 hours a day for 2 years? Yeah. Plus? So you at least have to undo 2 years. And as we realized, it takes 10 times the amount of positive to undo, the negative. So had you started early the right way, you would have prevented so much kind of time wasting. You've diverted from a path that you're on to a path that you should be. And it's easy to think that we can just jump across. But you're jumping across to a level that needs your attention. You can't just jump into matric and expect to cope. You need to be in standard 6. You have to do 7, you have to do 8, you have to do 9, you have to do matric. You can't just open the chapter, oh yeah, this is easy. No, it's going to be confusing. So you need to really kind of embrace the journey, but do it the right way and be open-minded to listening to various professionals, Yeah. So we could keep going. I think I'm happy with this one. I feel like I'm so ready to kind of get to our next. I think the next one's going to be very interesting. I do want to touch on the therapies that we've personally undertaken. Yeah.
kind of get us into our personal, so to tease the next one, my personal journey to get to where we are, and especially my thought process is quite unorthodox.
I'm excited that
and our psychedelic experience has really changed the whole perspective, the way I see things and the way I absorb knowledge, and it's very interesting, but that's coming up next. We'll delve into that now.
Yeah. So do you want to close this one off so you have a nice close off for this?
Perfect. Aimee, thank you very much. I've enjoyed our chat again. It's been wonderful. I'm glad we got to talk more about yourself and your business. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to attach a whole bunch of links and that for everyone to kind of click on. And so please go visit your page. Dr. Aimee, what's your Instagram handle?
Yes, it's just Dr. Blumears.
Dr. Blumears. I'll put all the links in the description below as well. That's what they say with these things, don't they?
Awesome. That's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
That's been very cool. Thanks so much for your time again. But I'll chat to you later, and we can looking forward to the next one. Cool.
Okay. Bye.
Cheers, bye. Bye.